Okay, so I'm delighted to be here today with Robbie Lawler, HIV activist, most recently seen educating the nation on Tommy Tierden's show. He's part of the European Treatment for AIDS group, is a PhD candidate in DCU, and is a co-host of the Pause 5 podcast.
Yes.
Robbie, it's great to see you.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah.
Always love chatting to you, Martin.
Oh, snap. It's great to be here
Happy Pride,
today.
by the way.
Happy Pride. I can't believe it. And
know.
finally we have a Pride after the year that wasn't. It's great to have it now.
Yeah, no, we deserve to go wild.
I
We all
I
do.
know.
Days
Yeah.
of go wild,
Well, Cork is preparing. It's definitely going to go wild this year. Today I'm really looking forward to chatting to you around a topic that we're both really passionate about, HIV, but really looking at it about HIV in the workplace and how we can create better environments, more inclusive and environments for all. So I suppose a really good place to start always is telling everybody who's watching today about HIV, but HIV in 2021, because we've all had a year to reflect in and all had a year where we looked at an epidemic and a pandemic and what that looked like. So it'll be really interesting for them to hear about HIV now.
Yeah, no, I'm always delighted to start off with HIV because I could go on this big spiel about HIV stigma and then everyone's like, what does HIV stand for? So they don't even know the very basics. And I have some sympathy towards that because when I was diagnosed at the age of 21, I didn't have a clue about HIV because I never thought it would be something that would affect me. I never had a sexual health education class, so I didn't know the difference. So I think it's a good place to start, actually, and what it's like to live with HIV now, because people have all these different misconceptions around HIV. You know, people who lived through the 80s, 90s still remember that Tombstone ad, "Don't die of ignorance."
That ad, will we ever forget it?
I don't think people will.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's good to kind of give an idea of what it is like to live with HIV now, especially when we talk about stigma and discrimination, why it's just no need for it in society. There never was, but particularly now, there's just no reason for it. So I'll start off. So HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus, and that's I got that virus through unprotected sex, okay? And that attacks my immune system, and you can get AIDS when HIV keeps battling your immune system and gets it so low that your body can't fight off an infection. And A stands for Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome. So that is basically an umbrella term for all just the infections that could kill you because you just don't have the immune system there. So there's a difference between HIV and AIDS, but they're used so interchangeably, as you know, Martin. But the fantastic thing is now, the medication are so good now, and we have so many different types of medication. Myself and Veda, who's the co-host of the Pause 5 podcast, I always call them like Tic Tacs. They're used to freshen your breath, essentially, because there's very few side effects. And if you have side effects in one, you just go on to another. It's fantastic. So what the medication does is it stops HIV from replicating. So as the virus doesn't replicate, it doesn't attack your immune system. So people who start medication can live as long as anyone else and have the immune system as someone who does not have HIV. So this is just incredible. Also what it does, and this is the best thing, and everyone should know this, is, remember I said it stops the virus from replicating? Well, it lies dormant or to sleep in different parts of my body, but there's so few free-flowing HIV in my system, in my semen, or if you have a vagina, in your vaginal fluids, or around your anus, that we just cannot pass on HIV sexually. It's impossible. And the amazing thing about that is I'm with my partner who's HIV negative, and for the last, 5 years since this research came out, we were actually part of research to show this conclusive evidence. I know.
That's fab.
We don't wear condoms. And this is the
course.
paradox, is that the safest people to have sex with, not to get HIV, are people living with HIV, who know their status, who are on effective treatment, and who have the virus to undetectable levels, we call. So if you're undetectable, you're untransmittable. That's the paradox. It's the people who don't know it, their status, that are the ones passing on. That's why we always encourage everyone to get tested. Know your status, get in treatment, live your best life, thrive in life, no drama. And that's what we want. However, although we're in the medical age of HIV, stigma is still there. And because of stigma, we get discriminated against, even in the workplace, which we'll probably talk more about today. So I'm happy that we had this living with HIV in 2021.
But it's so important, isn't it? Because that U equals U message is just crucial. Like how far they've come in terms of effective treatment and what the treatment can do now is amazing. And I can't believe you were part of that partner study. Like that was a massive cohort study.
I know. So the very first one showed that you can't pass it on through vaginal sex, but we didn't know if you could pass it on through anal sex. Really, we had some data, but not enough. So they had a clinical trial running, a part of the clinical trial, which was around the world, but they were running it also in James's Hospital. And my partner saw the study, and he was like, "Let's do it." And I was like, "No, absolutely not." Because the last thing you want to do is pass on HIV to a casual sexual partner or someone who you care about or you love. Like that's just the last thing anyone living with HIV wants to do. And the full data set wasn't in, and I was like, knowing my luck, I'd be that point, not 1% or whatever, because we didn't know. But Morris said, my partner, let's go to the research nurse, let's talk about this, and I want to do this for us, for history, and also the HIV community, because it was such a monumental study. And we took part in it, and we had to like basically write down how many times we had sex and stuff like that, and then we were talking to some researchers.
Following along.
Exactly, I was like, piss me off that. So anyways, we're doing that, and we got the tail end, so we're doing the last 8 months of the research, but it was nice to be somewhat part of it anyways. And conclusively, the risk is 0. There's not a reduced risk, blah, blah, blah. The risk is an absolute 0, and this is just liberating. It's great from a public health point of view. We get everyone to know their status, get them on treatment, get them undetectable. We'll have no new HIV infections. But for me, it's the most liberating thing, because even just since 2012, 2015, roughly, when I was part of that research project, I was like, the idea of me passing on HIV was just the most scariest thing, and it made me have so much self-stigma. It made me feel dirty. It made me feel unclean, potentially being able to pass on something that's a chronic health condition. Now, you can live as well. It's the most manageable health condition there is out there, chronic health condition, the most manageable. But yet the idea of passing on, like I wouldn't want, if I had diabetes, I wouldn't want to give diabetes to my partner, essentially. Do you know what I mean? So the fact that I know that I absolutely can't, and the fact that I'm the safest person for him not to get HIV, I'm like, he should be saying thank you every time we have sex. And I'm like, I was like, people should be queuing out the door for people living with HIV to have sex with them, because we're doing the community a favor, because we know our status. We take our treatment every day, we adhere to it with supports, which we do need, and then we're undetectable. So yeah, it's mind-blowing. It's a complete game changer. The problem is not enough people know about it. And that's the problem. And that's where, as a community and as in terms of allyship, we should be telling everyone who's willing to listen. And even if they're not willing to listen, tell them anyways.
Come here, couldn't agree with you more. I actually think that is one of the biggest issues. There's a knowledge gap, isn't there, from how far we've come forward in our journey around HIV and treatment and how it's all working, to what the community knows, and the really wider evolving Irish community know around HIV, and they remember those awful lads, but they don't know our new story and the new way it's transpired. And so I think that knowledge gap has really led to kind of stigma in the area, and I'll never forget that survey from HIV Ireland a few years ago, which highlighted the level of stigma in Ireland that people are facing, and it is shocking. Like, isn't it?
It's shocking, and it's born out of ignorance, a lot of it. In that survey, the HIV Ireland Stigma Survey, they showed like 1/3 of people thought you can get HIV from spit. 1/4 of people thought you can get HIV from kissing someone. Kissing! Have you ever been to Chambers or to, I don't know, Coppers on a Saturday night? If you can get HIV from kissing, everyone would have it. But if that's the level of knowledge, of course people are going to fear us because they think they're going to get a chronic health condition. And that's just not the case, do you know what I mean? But that's just a lack of education. As you said, there's a knowledge gap there. But what hurt me most, I suppose, within that stigma survey was that they also surveyed people living with HIV. And there's around 164 people living with HIV. And 17% of them said that they had suicidal thoughts within the last 12 months. 17%, that's 4 to 5 times more than the general population side, the people who do not live with HIV. And that is, for me, that's a real epidemic in itself. An epidemic within an epidemic, and it derives from silence and shame around HIV. So when we're talking today about stigma and discrimination, it has huge ramifications for the lived experience of the thousands of us. There are thousands of us living with HIV in this country, and around 50% of all new diagnoses are gay and bi men. So this is something our community really need to tackle.
100%. And it's actually, I think that's such a good point when you say an epidemic within an epidemic. That's exactly it. And when you say that statistic around suicidal ideation, it's so hard, isn't it? Like, those people should have somewhere to turn to, support services to reach on. And they're placed in that position from a society that isn't knowledgeable enough or hasn't taken the time to educate themselves, and that's not okay.
I don't think we really grieved the AIDS pandemic, or the epidemic, the Irish one, I should say. HIV medication came in 1996, and because people kind of stopped dying who had access to that treatment, I know some LGBT groups wanted to stop talking about HIV. HIV activists want to stop talking about HIV. Queer activists want, because it was just so traumatic. Government officials stopped talking about it. We've got no education since. And I always say, do you know, where silence reigns, trauma thrives, essentially. And because we never really talked about HIV since then, I get a diagnosis in 2012, and there's no one, not one person who's talking about HIV that I knew of, I should say. There probably were people out there, but openly talking about it, that I could be like, oh, they live okay with HIV, that's fine. No one knew nothing about HIV. It's like we just collectively forgot about it, but yeah, HIV rates were on the rise. So I'm so happy now that there's momentum. The community, again, it makes me so proud of the queer community specifically. I do see momentum. I do see us being a community and putting HIV back on the agenda, because we need to now more than ever.
Yeah, have it there. That's so true. And fair play to you. It's an awful lot of your activism and people like you who've been activists in this area and who are progressing this conversation forward that has moved that. And I know that you've been volunteering for years and for a long time in this area. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your volunteering and how that all started and came about?
Well, it came from my own diagnosis and not having a clue about it, and then being angry that I didn't know anything about it, or that I never had discussions about STIs or HIV with friends, or seeing a campaign in the queer community that like I remember, or with my sexual partners, never talked about STIs, let alone HIV. So I was angry about that. But what made me really angry was when I started giving peer support and I started meeting all these amazing people living with HIV, both men, women, gay, straight. And yet, as though I was meeting all these amazing people, I started hearing all these horrible stories of stigma. And what I realized was people were discrediting us socially because we have a health condition. And because they stereotype what HIV is, they think that we are less or dirty, or we almost deserve HIV, or do you know what I mean? We're socially discredited in some way. And I'm just like, I'm meeting all these amazing people. These are all incredible human beings. And what really made sense to me was that, as I said before, HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus, but people forget the H all the time. They just see us as vectors of disease. And I was like, I'm part of the problem here. Because secrecy is born out of fear and ignorance around HIV, because we're so stigmatized. People don't want to talk about their status. They don't want people to know that they live with HIV. But because no one's talking about it, the stigma and shame and lack of education persists. And I was like, I need to break this chain, because I want to bring back the HIV. But they're showing people that we're normal people. We just want to live our life. And that's what I'm saying. No, I would actually say we're extraordinary people, because I just meet them and I just fall in love with them over and over again, because I just see so much stories of resilience. And I'm always just constantly inspired by all the people who I meet. So I really wanted to break that chain, and that's where my activism and voluntary work really took off, because I was doing it for myself, because I want to live in a society that doesn't see me as less, because I'm not less. But I didn't want them, all my friends, to be seen as less. And so that's where I just start telling my story to literally anyone who will listen. Honestly, my poor barbers along the way, my taxi men, they all know my story by now, but I'm hoping that it got the conversation around HIV started again.
Oh, I definitely think it is. I think you're dead right. You know, it is, putting the human back into it is so important, because we're social creatures, aren't we? All humans. We need to interact with people and to see people, and for individuals to see a person interact with you and see your positivity or energy around this space, that's a huge combat stigma in this area. So it's fab.
That was the whole point of the Posvibe podcast. This is a shameless plug.
Oh my gosh, fair play. I actually think that podcast is phenomenal.
It's
well
so much
done.
fun.
It's
I
great.
a lady who's like Dublin's iconic drag queen who also lives with HIV, and they bring the fun. They say I bring the facts, which I don't think I do, but we have the most amazing guests. We had Peppermint from RuPaul's Drag Race on, Anna Matronic from Scissor Sisters, but more importantly, in my opinion, we just have normal people living with HIV in Ireland who just want to share their stories, and everyone bringing back the H. And while just talking about our HIV journey, what brought us to the point that we wanted to talk in this podcast, and it's just been truly inspiring for me. And now, from someone who in 2012 that no one was talking about it, now we have people coming up to myself and Veda asking, can I be on your podcast to share my story? Like, that's for me, it's just the biggest almost sea change that we're seeing from this. So I'm excited for where it's going to go. We're already going to plan now season 2, and we just hope to keep the conversation going, not let the silence reign like we did previously. Let's just keep it on the agenda. And so my friend said to me previously, Jesus, Rob, you're a little bit oversaturated in the media and so talking about HIV. And I was like, isn't that the best thing ever? HIV should be oversaturated. Not me, but that topic of HIV should always be in people's faces, of sexual health in general should always be in people's faces, because as human beings, we're always like, that won't happen to me. That's going to happen to someone else. Always. We order other people, but it can happen to anyone. And I think the thing about COVID, it made people realize about transmission of viruses. It's just a virus. Once it gets into you, you have it. And you can get it in if you expose yourself all the time or if you expose yourself once. The same with HIV. So let's constantly keep the conversation going and just meet new people and amazing people while we do it.
Yeah, I think it's great because actually your podcast is so lovely. It's on my walk every time. I'm loving the podcast on the walk. But it really is educating the nation on like a new modern era of HIV, and it's lovely to hear all the stories. And actually, it was a Peppermint one I was listening to a couple of weeks ago, and I just laughed for the whole time on the podcast. It was real uplifting. Like, it's great. So well done to you all on that. When you were moving then from your volunteering into employment, what was that like for you?
So it's quite difficult. There's discrimination on a macro level with HIV, because I had a job waiting for me in Australia, and I was just fresh out of 4 years of college, and I was supposed to go to Australia, but when you live with HIV, you can't get a residency visa in Australia. I think New Zealand or Canada is the same. In 2012, and I was diagnosed, you couldn't. HIVtravel.org is a great resource. It tells you all the visa requirements for people living with HIV. But imagine so many of these countries around the world can't even accept me. So that's one big thing that stopped me from pursuing my dream. And I could have gone for a year or two, of course, but if I wanted to prolong that, it wasn't going to happen. Second thing then, I was like, in the depths of depression, I was like, I want to travel anyways. I'm going to go for a job in Emirates, just so maybe I can travel that way. And I remember putting a day effort into this because it's a huge application. And then the very last question was, do you live with HIV or Hep C? And I was like, because it's based in Dubai, and you're not even allowed into Dubai if you have HIV. So that was the second one.
Wow.
Then, because I was so involved in voluntary work and a bit of policy work, I'd done a good bit of work in the UK too. On my CV was HIV, and I was so nervous about using this as my CV, even though when you work in HIV campaigning, it's so transferable to so many different jobs. And I think anyone in terms of activism, for whatever it is, you get many great skills that can go into loads of jobs. But I was still afraid that like someone from HR would just see it and throw it in the bin. And it really kind of stopped me from going for jobs that I really wanted, funnily enough, even though I was quite open about it. So that was still me overcoming some internalized stigma, I thought. So I wanted to make my own job, work for myself, and I do that through education, going around, and then I work freelance in terms of policy with European AIDS Treatment Group, which I meant previously, and I work with organisations such as You Stop AIDS and Stop AIDS in the UK, and do some in the States as well. So, and now I'm doing my PhD. So through that, I've kind of worked for myself, but that was for me being fearful of HIV being so prominent on my CV, knowing that I also lived with HIV is very, like, you could notice there, but so HIV never really affected me in terms of employment, other than I couldn't get a job in another country. However, I remember I said I was making all these friends living with HIV. They would tell me about some stories about how they were discriminated about HIV in their work. Some people work in client-based environments. So some are hairdressers, barbers, some work in childcare, that's not client-based, but you know what I mean. And they are terrified of or teachers, school teachers. They are terrified of of people finding out about their HIV status because they think they might lose their clients, or they'll be indirectly discriminated in work. So that is the fear stopping them talking about their HIV status openly. And we know as queer people, when society places or forces a secret on you, that makes you feel less, it makes you feel distant. You can't thrive in life when society forces a secret upon you. So you might think, oh, well, they can tell family or friends outside it, but hiding any sort of secret is so detrimental. It really is. So it's kind of, how can we foster environments that make people feel safe and open and unjudged? And because as employers, you know, we do have a duty of care for the people that we look after. That's why you're in a role of leadership. So I hear that quite often, so that stops people to perceive stigma of what may happen if they get HIV diagnosis. And then there's a few times where, one example, this guy lived with HIV and he had to take the morning off to go to the clinic. Now, if you live with HIV, the likelihood is you only have to go twice a year to collect your meds, so very minimum disruption to work life. And he just had to go for his normal one, and HR was like, why? And he ended up just telling HR because he thought he had a good relationship with this person. And HR was kind of taken aback, but she was like, go ahead, go to your clinic. But apparently the next day he went into work. That person, HR, wrote an email to everyone on his office floor to tell them that he has HIV. Because she thought she was doing the floor a service because she thought he was infectious. Now that's probably one of the most horrendous that I've heard, or maybe there's been situations of people, you know, indirect discrimination of, no, it's actually direct, of lessening people's hours in work, for example. Do you know what I mean? But that was the one that really struck out to me. Now he's fine now, thankfully, but it was a really traumatic time in his life. And what I want people to know is that everyone has the right to privacy. If they tell you something in confidence, we're not juicy gossip. Our HIV status is no one else's business. We can pass on HIV. So if we tell you something in confidence, one, be delighted that we told you, because it says a lot about you. But two, you have to respect our privacy. And that's something that we should really hammer home here. And it's not just HIV. Someone could be talking about mental health.
Yeah.
Do you know, in any form of health.
It could be anything. Yeah.
Exactly.
If you're going to be a good friend or a good comrade or a good colleague, it's really important to maintain a person's privacy if that's what they want.
You would think that is common knowledge, but when it comes to HIV, when people don't know and they have that fear, they can act irrationally. But that can have huge impacts on the lives and livelihoods of the people living with HIV, or who your duty of care is towards. So that would be some examples of where it comes from. And we should let everyone know here that it is illegal to discriminate on anyone living with HIV based upon their HIV status. It's illegal, and I know Erin from HIV Ireland is doing incredible work where she actually has some cases in the Work Relations Tribunal, I think it's called, for discrimination happening in the workplace. And I encourage anyone who is listening, if you feel that you are being discriminated in work because you're HIV positive, write to HIV Ireland and see what's available to you, because we should not put up with it. No one should put up with any form of discrimination, but this is illegal, and there are supports out there for you. So I would encourage people to reach out.
100%, because actually it's under the Equality Act, isn't it?
It's under the Equality Act.
And absolutely, like, Erin is doing great work in HIV Ireland, and I know they've been in the Workplace Relations Commission and giving people advice on how they can actually advocate for themselves and what they need to say. And I think that service is just so crucial to the community, because actually the other thing is they're synthesizing all of this information from many people who have brought things forward to the Workplace Relations Commission, and they're learning all the time about how they can interact with that. So that's really important. I absolutely agree. And so then, what do you think the workplaces can do? So I find it shocking. It's still sitting with me, that story of somebody sending an email to an entire floor of colleagues and that person having to come in the next day to work. I'm just imagining their morning, you know, where they were walking and being like, you know, usually I arrive from work and I'm like, I need a coffee now straight away. That's point number one. And that totally changed. That his morning totally changed, and whatever his plan was, it changed immediately. So what can workplaces do to make more inclusive environments for people, to make it a safer space? What would be like best practice?
Educate, educate, educate. Isn't that just the best thing? Like, I know it's very cliche to say it, but it actually works. And myself and Veda Lady, and I know many people join Sexual Health Centre Cork and HIV Ireland and Sexual Health West, like we have dedicated people where we go in and talk to organisations, workplaces, corporations about what it's like living with HIV and stuff like that. So I would say reach out to any of us and see if there is space in where we can come in to talk about it. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing is just showing solidarity in any way you can. There's Irish AIDS Day, which is the 15th of June, if I'm not mistaken, and World AIDS Day, which is the 1st of December. Every year. You don't have to do it all year round, but it can be 2 days where you dedicate to office space and solidarity, essentially. And that can be for bringing in leaflets, that can be from wearing red ribbons all around the place, that can be having us come in to talk to you, or just to having a big You Equals You banner on your wall or something. Because listen to this, employers, for whoever out there, statistically with Ireland, with its 2 degrees of separation and the thousands of us living with HIV in this country, you probably have someone in your office who lives with HIV, who knows someone living with HIV, or who will know someone living with HIV. So any sign of solidarity is amazing. And let's if you also, in any workplace, show signs of openness and non-judgment, it might not be that they come at you about something with HIV. They come at you about something else that's just as equally as important for them. And what we know from statistics is if people can be out about their queer identity in a workplace in a safe, we are way more productive. We bring more money into your company. Now, I hate putting a money stamp on being nice
the economy
to us.
of it. Yeah,
exactly. But there is, I suppose, there is a monetized incentive to create an organization that is open and non-judgmental. So I would say really foster an environment of well-being and the well-being of every single person who works there, or even your clients. So that's what you can do. One of my favorite stories, it's a small sign of solidarity that I tell everyone because it always means so much to me, is that the red ribbon. I had a friend who lived in London at the time, and he was given a diagnosis, and he was living it for 3 months. He had really bad mental health issues. He felt so much internalized stigma, and he didn't tell a soul. And he was on the tube one morning in London, and he seen some woman wearing the red ribbon on her jacket, and he said to himself, he's like, people do give a shit. Like, someone actually cares. There's one person who supports me living with HIV out there. And from that, he went home and told his family and told his friends, and now he's one of the biggest activists in the UK for HIV. And I was just like, it's just such a small sign. But when you're so isolated, when society throws you in a viral closet because it says that you are less when you're not, people shine a light and help you out of that closet when they show any sign of solidarity and knowledge around HIV. And I always say to people, try and be that one person.
Love that story on the train and the way it works. A lovely story. Yeah. I think you did right. Actually, I love the idea of businesses showing solidarity 2 days a year. Like, nice 6 months apart as well. Like summer solidarity and Christmas.
Refresher.
Yeah, a little Christmas gift then. I think those 2 times are great because you're right. Irish AIDS Day and World AIDS Day are big events, and if they can do emails, leaflets, have us in to talk and really educate their teams and their employees, but also in part, if you get somebody in, they have a really good talk on the You Equals You message, they're going to go home and they're going to talk to their family and say, come here, I was in work today and this person was in, and that's what they were talking about. And it just has that lovely ripple effect out into the community.
Effect.
Yeah.
I think people want to know. People actually are so interested in HIV, they're so interested in sexual health in general, so you can have a broader conversation also. People actually genuinely want to know. Anytime I give HIV talks, like, nearly the whole office wants to come. All the time, just purely because people have an interest for educating themselves, and a lot of people want to educate their families, especially if they're young kids, they want to be equipped with the knowledge and so on and so forth. So I would say it's in everyone's interest and benefit, for sure.
Yeah, 100% agree. And that sounds like a perfect little call to action. So as I sit here with an activist, I think we better have a call to action to finish this off. So I think our call to action for this workplace and diversity thing should be that workplaces commit to focusing on Irish AIDS Day and World AIDS Day and giving information out to their teams around HIV.
15th of June, 1st of December.
Right.
It's going to be red ribbons everywhere.
Get ready for it. Robbie, it's been lovely to chat to you, as always.
Let's get drunk for the rest of Friday.